Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Growth in a Pandemic panel. I'm your host, Sandhya Hegde. I'm a VP of Product at Amplitude, where I focus on our new product innovation projects. Now, before we kick off, I want you all to take a big step back and think about March 2020. That was when we first realized that we were facing a global pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty for companies that weren't just pure software plays around how to navigate the future. Is this pandemic going to end brick and mortar retail? Are grocery stores going to struggle to manage the immediate spikes in demand? Is it going to end travel? How many businesses will need to transform or die? And while a lot of these are still open questions, we can better equip ourselves to deal with them today by learning from those whose businesses felt the impact pretty much immediately all the way back in March. So, what you and I are going to learn from this panel is how product and data leaders in three thriving companies, Shopify, Shipt, and Imperfect Foods, navigated that early uncertainty and how their companies are changing today as a result of their growth during a pandemic. How they experimented, how they found new revenue streams, and how they leveraged data to build their best products and services, making 2020 just a little bit easier for their customers. So, with that, let's have our panelists introduce themselves. Patty, Vinay, and Philip, please tell us more about your current role, your company, and one new thing you have started doing while sheltering in place this year.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patty Chan. I am VP of Product at Imperfect Foods, where I oversee product design, and user research. So Imperfect is an online grocer. We take surplus foods and imperfect produce, deliver it straight to customers via this customizable, affordable weekly subscription. And we've got about over 400,000 active customers. And the one new thing that I started doing while sheltering in place is a daily meditation practice. Now that I don't have to run out the door commuting, I start every day with 10 minutes meditating in front of my garden.
Hey everyone, I'm Vinay Bhatt, and I'm the VP of Data Science at Shipt. We're a nationwide grocery delivery marketplace and last mile grocery solution, and I'm responsible for the data science and data warehousing organizations. I would say probably the biggest life change for me personally during the sheltering in place has been I spend a lot more time in the kitchen, cooking and baking, along with I think a lot of my fellow shelterers. I was already moving in that direction before the pandemic, but sheltering in place has really accelerated that trend.
Hi, I'm Phil Rossi, Director of Data Science at Shopify. Shopify is a global commerce platform that supports over 1 million businesses. We help entrepreneurs go from idea to fully scalable business by providing a trusted set of tools to help entrepreneurs start, grow, manage, and market a retail business of any size. My current capacity as director has me overseeing a number of data science teams embedded throughout the organization. One thing that I've picked up since the pandemic started is a lot of gardening and landscaping, I would say, probably more so than I've done at any other point in my life.
Nice. Yeah, those sound like really, really lovely hobbies to pick up, and hopefully we keep them as the quarantine eventually shuts down. All right, so take me back to what was happening for each of you in March. What was the conversation like at your companies? What were the immediate changes that were already happening? And what was the impact on your teams? Like, how were people reacting to that, uncertainty and confusion that was happening in March? And maybe Philip, we can start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So we were looking at the effects of the pandemic from very early on in late January. Shopify has merchants all around the world in over 175 countries. So we were already looking at the effects of everything happening in China and then later on in Italy as their lockdown started. So it became clear around March we as an organization really needed to rethink our roadmap and start to think about the best things that we could be doing for our merchants as the pandemic played out. At the same time, within our data science organization, we set up a task force of data scientists that normally embed themselves within different business units of the organization to come together and help us tell the story of what was happening as the pandemic played out. And then for our merchants, the impact was huge. For those with a brick and mortar presence, they had to move online quickly. So we saw a lot of merchants that weren't traditionally online, like grocers, wineries, breweries, move online very quickly. We also saw others start to pivot their business and we saw apparel companies, for instance, starting to offer masks as products. So definitely we felt the impacts quite early in March.
What about you, Vinay?
Yeah, for us, I think we are only in the US. So I think we first noticed it, I think it was Thursday, March 12th, is when we saw demand just go through the roof. And very quickly, we had to react. I think similar to what Phil described, we spun up a lot of tactical squads, both for internal and external initiatives. So some of the internal things were led by a product management team, but there was an opportunity for some engineers and data scientists to lead on certain initiatives, quick wins that could help sort of both our customers and internal support teams manage some of the process. For some of the external initiatives, we had to work a lot with our shoppers, send out PPE for those who are still willing to work and going out sort of to help our customers get key groceries during the initial first couple months of the pandemic. One of the things I think that internally we used a lot, specifically was as we spun up these features, actually Amplitude came in very handy for us, trying to figure out sort of where people, how are people coming into the process, where are they dropping out in the checkout funnel, how many people are struggling to see delivery windows. I know that we weren't the only delivery solution struggling to meet the increase in demand. And so we were able to iterate and sort of really be flexible in March and April in a way that we obviously hadn't planned for in January and February.
Makes sense. What about you, Patty?
Similar to Phil, we saw a change in our customer metrics a little bit before kind of the whole country went into shelter in place. So about a week or two before we saw orders go up, we saw the size of average orders, the spend that customers were making go up as well. It felt like we were having this front row seat to what we learned to be this unraveling pandemic. And similar to Vinay, we got a COVID task force together where leadership from every department met every day, twice a day, to stay on top of the rapidly changing nature of our business. Our operations was scaling very quickly, much faster than we had planned for. And so within product especially, we pulled our two disparate product teams back into one holistic team. And from those daily leadership calls, I would pass down the priorities to the product management team as we saw ourselves growing rapidly. And this is pretty different from what we normally do. Normally, our problem solving is very bottoms up, but we knew exactly what needed to change as we were watching our operations and looking at the metrics.
Makes sense. And you said something really interesting, which is, normally you're operating bottoms up, and now suddenly you need a lot more speed top down. And, Vinay and Philip, I'm really curious, given your role as data leaders, I'm sure you had a lot of pressure on you to kind of read the tea leaves and, forecast what's going to happen. And I'm sure you had like your CEOs and the boards kind of putting a lot of pressure on you to help them make the right decisions. What was that like? What were the kind of questions that you were grappling with? And in a world where you never have the perfect data for even for what's actually happening, how did you kind of deal with what are the scenarios we need to plan for when, you kind of have to throw out the rule book?
I think our forecasting was basically turned on its head in March. So we plan typically on an annual basis, but also at the quarterly level. And our demand spiked in March, and our supply, which is our shoppers who go out and go to the store, pick the items, pick the orders, that basically had to scale up to meet that demand. And so one of the things that we saw come through, and I think you're spot on that both at the executive level and at the board level, there were a lot of questions about how quickly can we scale up, what kind of demand are planning to see. And one of the challenges for us was, hey, like, we're in a very uncertain time. We will not be able to provide like a rock hard answer. Our forecasts are normally very close to actuals, but in this environment, we're going to try and use a much shorter term sort of trend to figure out, okay, where are we going, and let's iterate quickly on these forecasts. So where our process used to be a little bit more rigid and not so much human in the loop, starting in March, our forecasting became much more sort of nimble. And there was a lot more human input about, okay, when do we know about certain parts of the country going into sheltering in place versus opening up slightly? What do we know about certain regulations in those markets, whether it's from Seattle to sort of Tampa? What is going on? And so we actually, I think, got a lot more involved in the forecast, but also had to say like, hey, look, this is uncertain for all of us. The data scientists don't have a crystal ball either. Phil, I suspect you have some of the same experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were a couple of things key for us as we started to receive some of these questions. So we were getting questions about forecasts. We were getting just questions about what's going on with our merchants. How are they being impacted in different places in the world? What are their customers doing? What types of products are they leveraging? What are the various trends that we're seeing? Alongside the forecast and thinking about what could be happening in the future. So there are a couple of things I think that were key. One was at Shopify, we spent a number of years now building out a strong data foundation. So we've invested a lot of time in thinking about what is the way in which we can model our business processes in such a way that we can ask questions and analyze and be ready for things that come up. So that became hugely important for us. The second thing was this task force. The mandate was really to dive into insights daily and really get back to the rest of Shopify to talk about the things that we were observing. And the thing that it empowered us to do is to come to an understanding that on any given day, we didn't have to have all the answers, that we could give everybody the insights that we were aware of at that particular time, knowing that tomorrow we would continue to look and continue to dive and look for new things. So that was really interesting. And then on the forecasts themselves, I think you kind of hit it on the head. We don't have the crystal ball. I think for us, a lot of the work was around thinking about the various scenarios that could play, which was sort of a different activity than what we were normally used to, but really informing the leadership team as to what could potentially happen. We found that they always weren't looking for the most accurate forecast, but just some sort of insight in terms of what scenarios could play out in different situations and what are the things we should be doing as an organization to prepare.
And Patty, as a product leader, like, how are you thinking about, hey, middle of a pandemic, should we be pivoting product strategy for the pandemic? We don't know how long it will last. Maybe the right answer is to do nothing. Like, how did you think through that challenge, and how did it actually impact what you guys ended up doing with your product roadmap?
We did change product strategy quite a bit. We went into the year, much like other companies, with OKRs, a roadmap, and suddenly we grew quarters ahead of where we expected to be. And so we went from a roadmap that was largely focused on new customer features and extending our personalization for our customers to almost entirely focused on operational scaling and sending very timely, accurate messaging to our customers, as we found that we did have a little bit late, or we did have some changes to delivery schedules and fulfillment. And so we built those features very quickly, and we also implemented a wait list. So we going into the year, we're focused on filling up our new warehouses as quickly as possible. And we didn't think that we would have to turn away customers, but we did make a decision to really honor our existing customers, make sure that our service was as top notch as it could be. And so one of the things that we built during this time was a wait list so that folks interested in our service could sign up and be told when they could start getting subscriptions from us. And that gave us time to really get our operations in place so that we could service our existing customers better.
It sounds like a lot of these things, will potentially have a lasting effect on your businesses. So if you take a step back and think about it, like what are some maybe core strategic assumptions or decisions or choices you had made that now, you guys are kind of moving away from or shifting, or maybe, competitive advantages or strengths in your business that are kind of emerging as a function of reacting to this pandemic. Really curious to hear, like, how is the shape of the company changing because of the fact that you had to grow through a pandemic? Vinay, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Actually, some of the things that we're doing, I think, were accidentally sort of timed for the start of the pandemic, and they're things we'll continue. And then, sort of like you said, there's maybe new stresses or new focuses on the industry that are driving new sort of product lines. And so, in the former, I guess I would say that in March we actually started testing a pay-per-use, pay-per-order model. Historically, Shipt has always been a subscription-based model. And so instead of that, in March, we were offering one delivery for $10, for example. And that was initially supposed to be a test, but then as sort of demand spiked, that's something that allows a lot more opportunistic use of Shipt in the marketplace. And it's something that I think we want to keep around because there are a lot of customers who may not necessarily want to sign up for a long-term membership upfront, and they may be using us because of health concerns at the moment or local regulations and things like that. I think an area where some of the strategy is shifting for us is I think we talked a little bit about sort of an increased focus on e-commerce just in general. Phil mentioned that a lot of the Shopify customer base or merchant base has reclaimed lost sales. And I think in our space in online sort of retail and grocery specifically, there are a lot of retailers who were maybe reluctant to get online. And now they're finding that that is actually like a large growth path for them. And so one of the things I think that there's just an increased focus on grocery and last mile delivery in general. And there's an opportunity for us with our product lines across the board of we build the front end and back end, we do the back end, we do the front end, or we just do the last mile fulfillment, that we can actually play a part in that growth.
Patty, what about Imperfect Foods? Anything fundamental that is going to change for the company?
Not so much changing for the company, so much as expediting and doubling down on our strategy. This pandemic has caused this 37% jump in online grocery shopping overall. And in places like China, that never returned to normal or hasn't yet. In fact, there's this new normal that's happening. And on top of that, we're seeing that at the same time, customers are showing this renewed interest in eating healthy, choosing sustainable options. And so that just gives us more confidence than ever that the strategy where we're focusing on our mission is stronger than ever. One recent industry survey said that almost a third of Americans are willing to spend an extra $20 a month to fight climate change. And we think our service meets this core need of customers getting food, getting groceries that feed them every week, while also sharing their values to be good for the planet. So we are in double down mode.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, Imperfect Foods has like such a lovely mission. It's incredible how much food gets wasted because it doesn't meet code. Makes sense. All right, so let's shift the conversation a little bit to data and metrics. And would love to start this one with you, Philip. Uh, when you all knew that 2020 wasn't quite the year that you had planned on paper, what did you do? Like, did you officially change the metrics and goals for the year? And what was that like? Did you just say, okay, this year there are no annual goals. We are going to do this, day by day, month by month. Like, what was kind of the decision on how to do goal setting for the rest of the year? And what were some of the key benchmark metrics that you all kind of align around and made sure that the whole company understands them and how they are moving?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Generally speaking, there were no new goals set for 2020, just given the uncertainty around how the pandemic was impacting our business and our merchants' business. But we do absolutely track a number of metrics. So I mentioned a little bit previously about the foundation that we built. So we spend a lot of time to build out a pretty strong data foundation so that we can track many different metrics about our business. But a lot of the things that we look closely at and monitor on a daily basis would be things like our merchant sales. We always want to ensure that they're doing well and doing the things that they need, but also other longer term metrics like things like lifetime value and things like that. But those tend to move a little bit more slowly. But yeah, focusing primarily on like how well our merchants are doing is something we look at often. But with the focus being just making sure we're constantly looking at ways in which to help them through the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think going back to something we talked about earlier on forecasting, Q2 basically we threw out our quarterly OKRs. We restarted those in the second half of the year, and we actually reset some of our guidance and forecasts for the rest of the year starting in June. So basically March, April, May was a lot of wait and see and sort of, the goals went out the window, like you said. I think one of the new focuses for us is something that Phil mentioned earlier too, about being much more diligent about customer insights in this changing environment where week to week, market to market, things are changing. You can read in the news about how hospitals in Houston might be overcrowded or at capacity, and what that means for us necessarily. I think there's a lot of correlations between our demand and sort of what's going on around the pandemic, and that hunger for sort of customer insights. What products are people buying? Where are they buying it? Where do we need to staff up? Has been a much more regular focus since March than maybe it was before.
Yeah, apart from the typical business KPIs like average order value, lifetime value of customer, we also look at leading indicators that give us a much faster pulse on our business. So one that I'll talk about one that we've always used, and then one new one that we're starting to add. One that we've always used is box customization. So the way that our business works is we default these items into our customers' orders, but users who are actively coming in and customizing their box, removing what they don't want, adding a lot more things that they do want, are more engaged. And so we already had the instrumentation in place, thanks to Amplitude, to look at cohorts who signed up pre and during COVID to see if that kind of behavior was different. We also added a new success metric that we call start cart takeout rate. So we start you out with these items in your cart each week, but we're working to decrease that that takeout rate so that we nail your order and make shopping more effortless and even more convenient.
So, overall, with all these changes, like, what's been the impact on data culture at the company? Because, with everyone being remote and feeling potentially more disconnected, not knowing, how the business is exactly doing, how their customers are doing, hearing about layoffs, like, there's a potential for folks to feel a lot more destabilized. So I'm curious, like, what was the role that data and transparency played in your company, and how did you, as leaders for your own teams, think about the role that data might play in your company at this time. Vinay, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's actually been a lot that's changed for us in terms of how intentional or deliberate we are around using data. And so I think to your point of, hey, there's been a lot of change that people have experienced this year. And from a business perspective, what sort of comfort can we provide around how the business at least is doing and sort of the transparency there. So I think we got a lot more intentional and deliberate around sharing out some of the financial metrics, sharing out some of the company performance in our team forums, in our department and organization-wide forums. I think one of the things that I alluded to earlier, but we started doing these monthly insight sort of collections where we have a lot of embedded data science teams basically that align with the marketing team or an operations team or a product team and so on. Those teams are producing a lot of insights on a regular basis, but one of the challenges for us in sort of a remote context was there are way fewer sort of spontaneous or serendipitous conversations in the office. And so we started putting those together into our monthly insights deck. So we've got a monthly insights deck, we've got a Shipt intelligence committee, which is led by our SVP of design. And through those two forums, I think we're sharing out a lot more insights to a broader audience more regularly. And I think one of the things for us is, even when we were in office, we told ourselves that these things were happening spontaneously or serendipitously. The reality is we probably should have been doing this before. And sometimes we might kick ourselves about, why haven't we been doing this the whole time? But I think there's been Shipt has always been data hungry. And I think one of the things that we've morphed over the past 6 months or so, we've evolved in some ways to be much more deliberate about sharing out those insights and sort of engaging in discussion and cross-functional discussion about those.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Vinay described. One of the ways that we describe Shopify is it's a little bit more of a data-informed culture. So it's this idea that as a decision maker, you can take into account your knowledge and expertise about a situation and other inputs, and one of them being data to inform the decision that you're going to make. We found that early in the pandemic that a lot of us just didn't have experience dealing with this. And so that was an opportunity for data to really step up, be a voice, and tell the story of what was happening in very uncertain times. So it was really great to see the organization do that. We like to say data found its voice through this pandemic. And internally, I think Vinay also touched on this. We also embed within various business units with the intent of coming back and sharing and collaborating. But we found that during this pandemic is one of the first times where we really did that as an organization. And it sort of hits you as to why didn't we always do it this way? But we saw the value of having conversation amongst different people with different expertise about what was happening to our merchants and within the organization, and bringing that back together, coalescing and sort of telling that story frequently back to the rest of the organization was hugely impactful and beneficial.
Yeah, similar to what both Phil and Vinay said, our organization has always been very data hungry, data informed. But during the course of this pandemic, we actually saw our data culture change in two different phases. So phase one, it got more simple. In the early days of the pandemic, when we were just hyper focused on fulfillment and getting orders to all of our customers, we went back to basics. March and April was about looking at how many deliveries did we do yesterday, what percentage was late deliveries, and we focused on that until we got it back down to zero. So basic metrics. And then as we got a grasp back on our operations, we went into our second phase. There was a lot of curiosity company-wide on how users who signed up during COVID differed from our past users. And so understanding who these new users are, how are they behaving, what's motivating them to stay with us, And so we looked at these different cohorts quantitatively, but we also coupled that with a lot more qualitative data. And so we embarked on this customer research where we talked directly with 72 customers over the course of 2 weeks, and just learning more about why they were doing the things they do and how they were approaching all these decisions as the pandemic changed.
Awesome. Now, sounds like none of you wasted a good crisis, as they say, which is amazing. And what is really required for companies to shine in a crisis is like just us keeping our heads in the right place and going back to basics. So, in the spirit of that, would love to end with this question, which is, like, what has been a significant, big personal learning for you navigating all these curveballs these past 8 months? And what's one thing that, from your lifestyle you really want to keep? Or maybe, it's about a way you're working with your team, but what's one thing you really want to keep even when we are not locked down and life is like as close to normal again as it might get. Let's see. You wanna kick us off, Philip?
Sure. I think it's a couple of things that we've touched on. We really learned the importance of bringing together different data scientists from different backgrounds to really come together and tell the story and share their expertise in their domain back to the rest of the organization. That's one thing that really was powerful. The second thing that I've touched on a couple of times is just building out a strong foundation. It was really amazing to be in the position where we could ask questions of our business and we didn't have to necessarily worry about going out and finding the data. We had it readily available. We had thought about the business processes in the past, and it was more about just finding the right insights so that we could make the right decisions. And the third thing was really, as a data science organization, it wasn't just about providing the insights. It's really now about thinking about like us as experts within our particular domain, really providing back recommendations and opinions to the rest of the organization. So if I could continue anything, it's one of the things we really learned as a data science organization is that there's a lot of value that our team can bring to the organization through the idea of storytelling, bringing ideas together from many different places within the organization and that foundation. So it's definitely something that even hopefully as this pandemic ends at some point and we have the vaccine, that we can kind of continue keep doing within the company.
I love what Phil just said, the importance of storytelling and bringing all these voices together. I think my biggest learning is just reappreciating how important collaboration is. Getting all of these different people on different teams rowing in the same direction made me realize why it's more important than ever to have that good storytelling and have a strong product vision. It's so easy to become reactive to each of these new curveballs that are coming our way. And so for us, we're trying to find the calm to say, we've got something really good here. Let's double down. People are coming because of the convenience. We're on this mission to build a better food system. So how can we use one to do the other and get everybody onto this path with us?
Yeah, I'd plus one both of what Phil and Patty said. And I think sort of zooming out a level, I think one of the things the pandemic has sort of reinforced on our side is just kind of the importance of the people to the sort of outcomes. I'm sure we're all trying to hire sort of the best talent out there, but the pandemic sort of changed the ground underneath most of our team members, I think. And so to try and provide that environment where, hey, like we can both initially react maybe those first couple of weeks of March, but then start thinking more proactively and plan ahead. I think part of it was how do we storytell? How do we bring some of the people along? But a lot of it was how do we think about sort of how we manage ourselves and our teams as leaders in data science and product and so on, to make sure that our teams are capable of doing the best job that they can during these uncertain times. So trying to really set the stage for whether it was more tactically sharing these insights across the team, bubbling them up from embedded teams across the org, but also then providing the right foundation, the people foundation in a way for people to do their best work, understanding how to work from home during this pandemic and work around strained schedules and so on.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing these learnings with the audience of product and data folks today. I think some big highlights for me were, one, you were all really prepared to react fast. Like that foundation was there instead of, scampering to figure out how to react. You were prepared. You knew what metrics mattered, what you needed to focus on, what were the leading indicators that mattered, and like where to pivot. You weren't like married to the plan you had originally put together. You knew how your customer base is changing. So I think that was kind of one big takeaway for me. And the second one was that when you did see those customers needs changing, like your companies and teams have adapted to them from a place of really deep empathy. And often you're anticipating their needs based on kind of the early signs and building services that more people needed in the future, even before they really knew what was going to happen. And I think that's just a really great place to be able to pull that off. And last but not the least, you've been so thoughtful about how people collaborate in your companies, and you're focused on getting the inputs right, not just kind of like tracking the output. And when you get those inputs right and you collaborate the right way, to quote Bill Walsh, the score kind of takes care of itself. So yeah, Patty, Vinay, and Philip, thank you so much for your time. And I hope you all enjoyed this as much as we did.